don't you remember getting lots of indoctrination about how CFCs were going to kill all the ozone and wasting water? You had to turn it off when you were brushing your teeth. Because I remember that.
Well, okay. But that made you feel bad about existing.
Yeah. That's the thing.
So if you were going to be sorry, you had to be sorry that you were human, because then you existed and you polluted. But you didn't have to be sorry for anything you actually did.
Welcome to Scholé Sisters, the podcast for the classical homeschooling mama who seeks to learn and grow while she's helping her children learn and grow. Scholé Sisters is a casual conversation about topics that matter to those of us in the trenches of classical homeschooling, who yearn for something more than just checking boxes and getting it all done. I'm your host, Brandy Wenzel. You can find me over at the Charlotte Mason Think Tank. Go to afterthoughtsblog.net/think tank to learn more. My co-hosts today are Pam Barnhill, Mystie Winkler, and Abby Wall. Pam is a speaker, podcaster, blogger at pambarnhill.com, and author of 2 fabulous books, Better Together and Plan Your Year. Mystie is a homeschooling mom of 5, including 1 graduate. She writes and podcasts at simplyconvivial.com and is the author of The Convivial Homeschool, Gospel Encouragement for Keeping Your Sanity While Living and Learning Alongside Your Kids, now available on Amazon. Abby is basically the queen of the Scholé Sistership. Abby is a country-living farmer, rancher, a loving wife, and mom of 5 who homeschools and reads whenever she can. Do you want to enhance your reading? We've still got some copies of our 5x5 Challenge reading journal in our shop. The Scholé Sisters 5x5 reading journal helps you read, review, understand, and assess. It is designed to help you go deeper in your reading and thinking. Stop waiting for the right time or right pen or right month. The time is now. Start building habits of thinking and cultivate your intellectual life. Go to scholésisters.com/journal and get your copy today. In this episode, we're discussing the idea that classical education makes you more human. Depending on what you think this means, this phrase can come off as offensive, in conflict with Charlotte Mason's assertions that children are born persons, and more. Because of this, we're taking a deep dive into what this really means and why we think it matters. And so, without further ado, let's get to it.
Let's start off with our Scholé every day. Who would like to go first?
I will go first.
All right.
So I have a book that Amazon knew I needed that I didn't know existed.
Ooh.
It so often happens. So I was on Amazon, minding my own business, finding a link for the Hue of St. Victor Didascalicon. So I searched Amazon for Hue St. Victor. And the book I was looking for came up, which will be a source today. But another book also came up, and that was The Rule of St. Augustine with commentary by Hue of St. Victor.
No. Wow.
And I was like, well, that's a book I need. I didn't know that St. Augustine had a rule.
I didn't either.
I did.
I guess that would make sense, but I don't know. I feel like
Yay,
the rule of St. Benedict is the one everybody seems to talk about all the time.
That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, but there were other rules for other religious houses.
Right.
And I think I would have to go back and look. Where did I know that from? And I think it was when I was preparing for my love talk that I was reading a little bit about St. Augustine's rule. And I may have even used it in there. Something from it. I'd have to go back and look again. It's been like a couple years.
Well, I bet so. So one of the very last sentences is one that I noted. And so this is talking about the Mother Superior. And although both love and fear be necessary, yet she must seek rather to be loved than feared. and let her be strict with herself in observance of religious discipline and prudent in exacting it of others.
Darn it, you guys. I'm going to have to make this an episode on Amazon. And I'm like, yeah, I even like the cover. Darn it.
Scholé Sisters needs to buy it for you.
And me. Please send it to me too.
I have the credit card. Pam, do you want it? I'm doing it. I'm serious, Pam. Do you want it? It's your last chance.
I hate to and just add it to the stack of books I haven't read.
We're here to make you feel bad.
There we are, kicking it off. What are we?
Wow.
3 minutes in and we've made it an episode.
Like no self-control at all. It's a decent price for a book though.
Yeah.
Less than $11.
Well, I'm sure it's small. I mean, if you think about like the rule of Saint Benedict, is it? I guess you know, Mystie, because you have it.
Right.
I'm sure it's thin.
I'd say it's actually a normal sized book.
Is like that because of the commentary also?
It is because of the commentary also, but I will also say it has a lot of white space and a large font. So it's actually...
maybe I do need this book.
So you could say it's a real page turner because like every few sentences you're turning the page.
That's what my Kindle's like these days.
Plenty of room for commonplacing, or maybe for, marginalia.
Sorry, I'm still buying things.
Yeah.
Now they're recommending more books to her that she needs.
Yeah.
Really. It takes time to make the same purchase twice.
So yeah, the rule though is very short, like even shorter than I was expecting.
Okay.
And then the commentary is probably, I don't know, maybe 10 times the length of the rule. It really is a mostly commentary. And so I finished the rule and I've only gotten started on the commentary, but I mean, it's Hugh of St. Victor and I like his other stuff.
Nice. Oh, that's exciting.
I pick Abby to go next.
All right.
Okay. I just started, so I'm just a couple chapters in, but I am reading Beauty for Truth's Sake.
I love that one.
On the Reenchantment of Education by Stratford Caldecott. And I have read Beauty in the Word, I think, by Stratford Caldecott, but this one is really great.
Harder.
Well, but
it is harder.
Okay. Well, so far, so good. I'm feeling pretty good, but we've been kind of drenched in dreary books lately.
You don't like Marx?
No, I don't. Anyway, so I felt like I needed to combat some of the ridiculous, ugly, terribly written, stuff with just some beautiful words about the proper aims of education. So, which it's turning out to be. So I have a couple quotes here, and this is just in the first chapter, but it's talking about going to college and expecting nothing more than paper qualifications and a salary. And he is, Stratford Caldecott is saying, the idea that they might be there to grow as human beings, to be inducted into an ancient culture, to become somehow more than they are already, is alien to them. I knew that this would go along with the conversation for today. So it's more of our current culture. And I love this. The liberal arts, from liber, meaning free, were intended to train man in the use of his freedom and to prepare the student for higher study of philosophy and theology, through which one may become truly free, fully human. And he is quoting Pieper there. And, he quotes Dr. Gamble and the Great Tradition extensively in his little footnotes. So it's been really, really great to just dive into some of these things. And the last quote I'll share is, it is in knowledge that we transcend our limitations, including the limitations of morality, and become identified with the truth that is our highest and deepest ground, beyond all that the senses can offer. But knowledge can only be attained through the systematic ordering of the soul, or personality in pursuit of integrity. That is the discipline of thought by logic and will by virtue. I mean, I've got quite a few things underlined and I've already commonplaced a few things. And I love that he also brings in sources from what educators have been talking about and philosophers, over the centuries. And he uses it in such a way that it really brings it cohesive and a lot of topics crammed into small amounts of pages. So he's very succinct and it's very rich reading, which is a contrast to Mark's.
Just saying.
Just so you know.
Okay, Pam, I see your book on the list and I'm so excited. I just bought this book for one of my girls for her birthday.
Oh, yeah?
But I've never read it. So.
Oh, this is a reread for me. So mine is All Creatures Great and Small by James Herriot. Aww. And I read these back when I was in like 6th grade. And so it's been a long time. But I read the whole series. But we started watching the PBS show last season, the first season it came out, and just absolutely fell in love with it. And of course, we're in the 2nd season right now and just still really, really loving the whole thing. And it's been like, we've missed Downton. So this is nice.
Yeah. I've heard great things about it.
It really is good and so much better for the family than Downton. So, there's that. But if you like British shows, it's a really great one. But I had forgotten so much of what happened. And I guess just because I read it so young, I could remember all the stuff about the animals, but I couldn't remember all the stuff about the characters that were in the book. And I couldn't remember Siegfried or Tristan or anybody. And I just I need to read these books again. And so I ordered the first 2 and I'm going to read them. And Olivia says she's going to read them too. So
I didn't realize it was a show, but that makes sense because when I went to get it for her, I noticed that all the covers have been updated and redone and it's back in print and it's affordable and all this stuff. And I was like, that's interesting. Well, it makes sense now. It's a show. People are buying the book.
Yes. Yay. Yeah. I mean, people are buying the book. It's, having a rebirth in popularity. And it's fabulous because, it's just really good, wholesome entertainment so far.
Nice.
Yeah, we're hoping they keep it that way.
Nice. Well, I am reading this really uplifting book called The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde.
Marx and Oscar Wilde. Dorian Gray. You're just like a glutton for punishment, aren't you?
I really am. I've never read this book before, and it is horrifying.
I actually have never read it either.
Oh my gosh.
I started it and I couldn't keep going. I had to stop.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I've assigned it to my high school junior as part of her literature this year. And I don't actually remember why I did that. But I was like, I knew I needed to pre-read it, and it's getting close because she's supposed to read it in our 3rd term. So I picked it up and started reading it. And so far, I think it's fine for her to read at her age and everything, but it really is just horrifying. I'm not so far into it that Dorian Gray himself has had his fall into sin, though I know that that's coming. I'm just at the beginning. I'm in chapter 4 right now, I think. And so the first few chapters, it's he's met the guy who gives him all his bad ideas, the guy who plants the seeds of sinful thoughts in his mind. So there's 2 guys in the beginning, Lord Henry or so. I'm not good with names. I'm I should really make myself narrate so I can remember names of things. But that is this Lord guy. This is the guy that plants the seeds of the bad ideas. But there's another guy whose name I also can't remember. Oh my gosh. I sound like one of my kids doing a narration. This guy did that. Now I know why they do that. The other guy's the painter. And so he paints the picture, but I had this moment that was really interesting because I just had this passage in Charlotte Mason that I've just been mulling over for 3 or 4 months, kind of just in the back of my mind, where she talks about how there is an individual fall of man that happens when a child becomes self-aware. In context, she's talking about Jesus tells us to become like little children, right? And so she's asking the question of what does that mean? And she thinks that it is tied to their inherent humility. And what she means about that is that they're not self-aware. That's why they do some of the dumb things that they do, right? But they're not self-aware because they are interested in the things around them. They're not interested in themselves when they're first born. They're very externally focused. And so she talks about self-awareness, which none of us can avoid, but that there's an individual fall of man that happens when it happens. Well, there's this scene in the book that I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a vivid picture of this kind of a thing. So the painter has been telling Dorian Gray that he's handsome, and everybody knows that he's handsome, but Dorian Gray just kind of laughs it off. And he's not laughing it off in a false humility. I thought he was at first, but he's laughing it off as in he doesn't really believe it. When he sees the picture of himself, he just comes aware and he wants to, it's like self-preservation sets in. He knows how amazingly gorgeous he is, and he wants to stay that way forever. That's where that whole thing comes from. When he sees the picture of himself, he has this self-awareness, but that self-awareness instantly in Dorian Gray becomes self-love. It just is like a fascinating thing because I just kept putting it together with this thing from Charlotte Mason about self-awareness and an individual fall of man. And like for Dorian Gray, 100%, that's his individual fall. Like before then, of course he was sinful and all this, but it was very different. Like his fall into horrific sin starts with this moment when he falls in love with himself. Anyway, just fascinating and horrifying. Sorry, I'm like, I always bring these uplifting books to Scholé.
Hi, Abby here to tell you about the sistership. Homeschooling is important work, but it can feel overwhelming, wear us out, and take up so much of our time. Though it is hard work, it is good work. We all need real encouragement, supportive and truthful words, and discussions that engage our minds. Burnout is real. Discouragement happens in every homeschool. Our goal is to help moms combat burnout with Scholé. Sistership is the place for classical Christian homeschoolers to connect locally and online. We exist to help homeschool moms overcome exhaustion and confusion with refreshing, sound, and invigorating learning. We want to equip moms to connect with local and online community and help connect with big ideas that apply to homeschooling that are broad and liberal in scope. We strive to provide smart and stimulating content for the classical homeschooling mom. We won't waste anyone's time. Join today at scholésisters.com/sistership for free.
Today we're going to be talking about the idea of becoming, quote, more human. And I'm putting it in quotes because that is something that people will say. It comes up in classical books and classical circles. And
it was right in that quote Abby quoted.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. It's true. Yes. And we'll talk about the humanities and how they are humanizing. Like these are all things that we say. In fact, I was listening to a talk once. This was a really, really, really long time ago. But he put it in a way that I thought was even probably more controversial in these things. And he said, I'm not saying that classical education will, I can't remember who this was, by the way. Sorry. I just know it was a man. I'm not saying that classical education will save your soul, but it will give you more of a soul to save, which is like almost cringeworthy. Almost. So when we say things like this, there's something that we are saying that I think is true, but it can sound like it's dehumanizing almost, or it can sound like it's in conflict with Charlotte Mason's ideas that children are born persons. Like we'll even translate that and say like, they are born fully human. They're not becoming human. They are fully human. It can sound, I think, like an assault on the divine image of man in the sense of when he's born, him fully having that. And I was thinking about this today, and I also think that I have seen this in some classical schools that use this as an elitism. I am more human than you, if that makes sense.
That would be problematic.
Yeah. I would say so. Totally. What I would like to see us do today is talk about what truth is actually being expressed by those things and then separate it from that kind of terrible elitism that we don't want to fall into. I thought we should start about what do we mean and not mean by human? Like if we're going to say someone becomes more human, and yet we do acknowledge that when a child is born, they're fully human. So what is going on there? What do we mean?
I was thinking about this and how really we're using it metaphorically, not literally, because literally Charlotte Mason is speaking literally. And in theology, we're speaking literally that people are born with the image of God and are fully persons. You don't increase your value or the amount of humanity that you have. But as you are sanctified, and I think education can be a part of your sanctification, you do reflect the image of God better. So that's an angle. And then also, if we think about the opposite, we're all comfortable with, I think, the metaphor of man becoming more like a beast, an animal. And so there's this spectrum of which direction are you developing? Are you becoming more like an animal, unthinking, driven by appetites and instinct? Or are you becoming more human, which is things pertaining to humans and distinct to humans, using your mind? So if we develop the mind, we're giving our students the ability to grow into the humanity that they have. That was the thought I had.
You know, long time ago, like when we first started and I first set up a Facebook page for us, we had as a tagline something along the lines of civilizing little barbarians one book at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that getting at the same thing?
Yeah.
You think that's getting at the same idea?
Yeah. Yeah. Civilizing, I think, is using a different word for the exact same thing. Don't you have a definition, Brandy, that proves I'm right?
Yeah.
We're going to go straight to that, aren't we?
Which is actually why you asked the question.
Let's see. So, well, I do have in here the etymological dictionary on human, and it tied it to the idea of things being humane, which I think does bring us to the idea of humanities, of or belonging to man. If you describe something as human as an adjective, and this is the thing I thought was interesting. Maybe the equivocation is that when you say a child is born a person, you mean as a noun. They're born human. But when you say you're becoming more human, you're using it as an adjective.
Ah, the grammar approach. I like it.
Of course
like,
you do.
The danger is that I was never taught grammar formally. Oh.
And that's why you're learning it with your children, right, Brandy?
That is right.
That's also what I'm doing.
So it says here from the Latin humanus, which means of man or human. And it says also humane, philanthropic, kind, gentle, polite, learned, refined, civilized. Those are the ideas that this is getting at. And I think we do see a role for education in that.
Totally.
And I don't just mean learned.
Because when you think about toddlers, they're none of those things.
So true.
Sorry, I've been writing a preschool talk.
Oh, it's so true.
Well, and I mean, I like the words that they use there too, right? Learned, which means you're learning things, refined. And I just think of all the examples in the Bible that talk about God's refining fire and separating the gold from the dross. And I mean, sanctification, right? These are all processes that we all go through in our life and in our education. And these are the things that happen. So it's not new.
I think implied in this, we're saying then that you are born human, noun, but you're not born human, adjective. Is that what we're saying?
I think not fully human, adjective. There's room for growth. There's room for development and maturity and cultivation. You know, these are all education words. Mm-hmm. And we're to grow up into the nature that is ours. And it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen automatically. I think that's a part of what education's role is and why it comes up in books. Because if left to himself, a child is going to
bring his mother shame.
Yes. As the Proverbs say, become more like a beast. And we could also bring up Proverbs for that too.
Yeah.
So you have to be taught and listen to your teachers and your father and your mother.
You know, I was looking at this definition. It just dawned on me. I think maybe I found the antidote to that elitism that I mentioned. I'm thinking just about how if we get this sort of education, we're given what is called a classical education. And then as a result of that, we somehow think that we're more human than others, meaning better than others.
Right.
That's actually not kind, gentle, polite,
sanctified, humbled, right. Virtuous. We can keep going.
So like we gave part of the form of the thing, but we're not effective if that's the result.
Yeah.
Which actually makes me feel better about it. I mean, about saying it that way, because there was this part of me that was troubling, having seen that as an issue and not wanting my children to have that issue.
Right.
Because we, you know, even if we don't call it that, we've all seen the moment where homeschoolers start to think that they're better. Like my kids will call the children at the school down the street the prisoners. And
sorry,
even though it's kind of funny, I do feel like there's an arrogance in saying that too. You know what I mean? Like I try to stop them, but I leave them to themselves. So they're bringing me shame. What can I say?
And so you can go in the other room and laugh.
Right. With my friends.
Well, and I think it's okay. So if we look at this list, humane, kind, gentle, polite, learned, refined, civilized. So like the learned and maybe the refined comes from what we traditionally think of as intellectual education. The rest of it comes from what your mama teaches you at home, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not a privileged list. If you tick off these things and say, does everybody have the same opportunity to be most or all of these things? The answer is yes, everybody does. This is not an elite education we're talking here. Kind, gentle, polite. You know, the vast majority of things on this list are, you know, it's not only for the elite. They're not the only ones who are being educated in this way.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like most people have a grandma that tried to whip that kind, gentle politeness into order.
Oh, yeah. We had etiquette lessons with my grandma.
You gotta love a good grandma. That's funny. Manners is definitely implied in that list.
Yeah.
That's part of it. So there would be habits along with, well, actually, I'm seeing all of atmosphere, discipline, and life, if you think about it.
Yes.
In there, because it would be absorbed from your atmosphere, but it would also be disciplined in your habits. And then the learned and refined and civilized. I mean, there's an element of history and literature and all those subjects in there that are also doing their work upon you. So I think I see it all.
Well, I think another problem that can come up with that kind of list, or just the idea that maybe feeds into the elitism or the concern, is thinking that when you graduate with a classical education, you now have become fully human. Check.
Yeah, no.
Like you have attained full humanity at like 18 if you've been educated properly. Or maybe the classical colleges would want to say 22. But that's not what it means either. I think it is more helpful to think of it as a development direction and remember that learning is a lifelong thing. And so we're either moving one direction or the other, never attaining the end. Because the reason why we need cultivation and civilization is that we're broken. And that brokenness isn't going to be fully fixed until glory. And that's where Hugh of St. Victor comes in. But I packed my Hugh of St. Victor. So Brandy's going to have to save us.
Well, I did put pictures of those pages in there, but I was actually thinking that's where John Milton comes in.
Well, that's true. But Milton came after Hugh.
Okay. Does anyone have to wait to read the Milton quote?
No, I think the Milton quote summarizes it really well.
Okay. So I'm going to read it then because I have it right in front of me. The end then of learning is to repair the ruins of our first parents by regaining to know God aright, and out of that knowledge to love him, to imitate him, to be like him, as we may the nearest by possessing our souls of true virtue, which, being united to the heavenly grace of faith, makes up the highest perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So if being fully human is perfection, then there is no room for elitism, because no matter how well you are educated, there's more difference between you and perfection than there is between you and whoever you're looking down on.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about this, about how much of our education is necessitated because of man's fall into sin. Some of that is because otherwise we wouldn't have had physical death. So you would have had like these exceedingly wise people, right? Like if you've been alive and perfect for 5,000 years, imagine that. But in addition to that, we're born with all of these temptations, right? Like a lot of our uncivilized temptations they're sinful temptations, even though in toddlers, they are kind of funny. This idea that because I'm born so far from perfect, which is what you said, then this necessitates a formal program. We need to take action here on a more formal level, even than just grandma's manners lessons, though that helps. I'm just thinking about all the things we do because we're not at the ideal at all.
Yeah, it's going to take serious effort.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a G.K. Chesterton quote.
Ooh,
love those.
Yep. So people are inundated, blinded, deafened, and mentally paralyzed by a flood of vulgar and tasteless externals, leaving them no time for leisure, thought, or creation from within themselves.
And he lived before the internet.
Yeah,
I know, right? But I think be turning in his grave.
Yeah, but I was thinking about how this is that time for leisure, right? Scholé, thought or creation from within, like that interior life, that intellectual life, because we're so inundated with utilitarian purposes or the next thing, or let's just Google more information, right? And so much of education is about reflection and meditating on things.
Contemplation.
Contemplation. No wonder it feels like civilization is on that precipice. There is no time for those things to awaken those deep questions of wonder and awe and things like that. Education, when we are pursuing contemplation, meditation, right? Those things, those quiet moments, those times for reflection, narrating and writing those thoughts down. Those are the things that really help us crystallize thoughts and understanding. And that is when the education happens, right? When we are making it our own, right? Brandy, what does Charlotte Mason talk about in narration when in a child's own words, but it just becomes their own? What does she say?
Yeah. Well, she talks about we narrate and then we know.
Yeah.
That is the pursuit of knowledge. I mean, she really says that narration is akin to a personal experience. When you read it, it's someone else's experience. When you retell it, now it's yours.
Okay.
Mm.
There's an ideal type, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if that's where our struggle can be with this statement of becoming more human and how it can sound offensive to modern ears, is that really we've dispensed with the ideal type. And we're all supposed to just accept ourselves and others exactly as we come. No judgment, right? Like that's our highest virtue. Maybe that's why, even though we would say that this is true, the goal of education is to make us more human, that it sounds offensive because it sounds like you're saying something's wrong with me, guys. So you're supposed to say something is wrong with you.
Isn't that what G.K. Chesterton said? What is wrong with the world? And he's like, I am.
Right.
Right.
The education that we're giving in this culture normally, and what most of us, other than Mystie, received.
Neener.
Like it's not a source of conviction. I don't ever remember school making me feel like bad about my sins.
See, you weren't educated by your mother.
My mom can make me feel bad. That's for sure. But you know what I'm saying? It's really unfamiliar to us. The education of the 1980s, when I was going to school, was all about self-esteem and making you feel good about yourself. It was not about, yes. Huh?
Don't you remember getting lots of indoctrination about how CFCs were going to kill all the ozone and wasting water? You had to turn it off when you were brushing your teeth. Because I remember that.
Well, okay. So that made you feel bad about,
sin.
But that made you feel bad about existing.
Yeah. That's the thing.
So if you were going to be sorry, you had to be sorry that you were human, because then you existed and you polluted. But you didn't have to be sorry for anything you actually did. So we all grow up in this culture, right? And now we're on like, how many generations have been being raised like this? And so then you have someone say like, well, you're not fully human. There's this ideal you haven't yet reached. And that sounds offensive to modern ears. It just does, because nobody told us as kids. They told us we needed to learn things. Those were like intellectual things. The problem was your mind needed to be developed. It wasn't that you needed to be developed.
Interesting.
Well, that's the thing of public school, because I grew up in the 70s. That's when I went to school, and we made fun of all you people and your participation trophies because we were teenagers by then. But there was I won't say there was a complete and total absence of teaching of virtue, because I also went to elementary school in Alabama, and we prayed before lunch, and the 5th grade teacher, Miss Evans, would let us know if we were stepping out of line.
I love that.
But I mean, that wasn't what schooling was about. Schooling was about learning how to read and do math and things like that. So there was always a separation of virtue and education.
Well, and that's the one thing about the classical education, right? It is supposed to be uniting all of these things too, right? It is integrated. It is not just subjects learned at a certain time for a certain amount, but we are integrating all of these ideas, these disciplines and things like that. And it is the whole picture rather than these truncated and emaciated subjects, right? Because, math is just, you are learning how to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and calculate compound interest. You are not learning about sacred geometry or the beauty of math and nature and things like that, where classical education, I think, integrates all of those things. The Trinity and how the beauty of math is one thing that I think could never be in a public school, because you would have to have God in that.
There's also a different goal, a different conception of humanity because of the lack of acknowledging God.
Yes.
But also the different goal of education, which can be found in public school and private school and homeschool, that's antithetical to classical education, which is classical education's goal is to develop your humanity. It is to make you more fully alive, would be another often used phrase that I think is trying to get at the same thing. And it doesn't mean that you're half dead, like literally, right? It means that you are not experiencing, seeing, understanding all that there is to see and feel and understand. Education should take you from where you are further down or further up, maybe that developmental process. And that is a lifelong process. Learning is lifelong. Whereas the modern progressive idea of education is to make you a more practically competent contributor to society.
Yeah, they just want to prepare you for the job and then you're done and turn you loose.
Right. And so you are done with that when you get a job.
Right.
And now you're fulfilling the purpose for which you were educated. Whereas in classical education and this idea of becoming more human, if you transfer that and you think that education completes that goal by the time you graduate, graduation means check, you've accomplished it, then that would be offensive because it's so obviously false. We aren't perfect or all that we could be when we graduate. But through receiving a classical education, we should be able to continue that process on our own outside of a system of educators.
Okay, I have something I kind of want to say, but I'm afraid.
Do it.
Controversial.
Oh, geez. Let me hide.
I'm going to throw things at you.
The title, The Well-Trained Mind, has always concerned me and concerns me more in light of this conversation, in the sense that I think it gives the idea that classical education is about developing the mind.
It's been a while since I've read The Well-Trained Mind, but I do not remember, and I probably got a copy on my shelf. I could go get it.
Okay.
I do not remember anything in there about virtue outside of, and I don't even know that this was in there. Some families do Bible or religious ed. I could go get it if you want me to. I think it's right on the shelf in my schoolroom.
Yeah, that's tricky because I think the book is setting forth a program for educating the mind. It doesn't touch on the other parts. And so you could read that as this is what is being covered in this book, but it's easy to assume the next step of this book is everything you need for education, which isn't,
I mean, is that saying, I don't know, because I guess there is a difference between saying the goal is to improve your mind versus the goal is to get a lucrative job. You know what I mean? Like those are actually two different goals, though possibly related. But that doesn't sound like the goal of classical education. A real classical. See what I'm saying? I'm going to get in trouble if I keep talking. And I don't want to sound ungrateful because
I'm skimming.
Okay. I don't want to sound ungrateful because, I think Susan Weisbauer has done a lot of good things for homeschooling and, you know what I mean? But like, I just wonder if that was all you ever read about classical education, if you would come away with actually a not classical view, because is there a sense in which...
No, but there's other books out there too. Like I was thinking Climbing Parnassus, right? By Tracy Lee Simmons.
Yeah, I've never read it.
Okay, so I've read a good chunk of it. I it's one of those books you pick up. He or she, I don't even know actually.
It is a he.
It is a he. Okay. His opinion is that unless you are learning Greek and Latin thoroughly and have an education of letters, you are not classically educated, right? I mean, we are learning Latin, but we are by no means proficient. Latin, we're not great at Latin, but there is virtue in pursuing this and attempting as well. So the thing about education though, too, or a classical education is wherever you start, like God's grace, right? Where you meet it where you're at and it doesn't leave you there, right? God's grace doesn't leave you where you started, right? Through a process of sanctification and through a process of learning, no matter where you start, humbly, we all start humbly in this educational endeavor. And
we'd better all end humbly as well.
Yes. And we have, and we should, because the more we understand the amount of not just information out there, but actual knowledge. I mean, you just look at the great tradition and you think this is excerpts,
right,
of all of these great thinkers throughout history. And I mean, it is humbling because Dr. Gamble put this together, and didn't he translate most of it himself?
That's what
Mystie, isn't that what you're saying?
What we think, right?
I mean, this is a tome and an incredible work. And it is humbling because, we're reading it, but I mean, we're getting hints, we're getting small amounts. So, I mean, it's just.
Oh, I'm definitely still at the kiddie table. I mean, like 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are the 3 different kinds, really, the 3 different approaches for classical education.
Oh, good. Tell us.
This is totally new information.
No, but Missy, you took a class on.
Oh,
classical.
no, not like historically, but I mean, like right now.
Like right now?
Right now. Okay.
Yeah. There are the people that we tend to nickname neoclassical, that are the Dorothy Sayers, Susan Weisbauer. Classical is ages, stages, trivium, these subjects in this way, and you have to learn logic, and then it's a program. There you go. Memorize things. And it focuses more on what you do. Mm-hmm. And then the climbing Parnassus, Latin-centered classical education is a pretty minuscule fragment of the classical education world. But I think it is different because they define having a classical education as being proficient in the classical languages. And then the approach or the definition that I think relies most heavily on this idea of restoring our nature, becoming more fully human, norms and nobility. That stream is more about the philosophy of education than about the method of education. And so you could take any method and use it for the goal of getting a good job and being progressive. And so I think it's important to focus on the big picture goal of education and philosophy of education, because that's where the true distinction is between I'm trying to think if there's a different word than classical to use, a fully human education versus a progressive education, which sees humanity as it cannot see humanity as made in the image of God. So it has to assign humans value through some other means, like economic contribution. I'm not sure if I ended that thought, but I'm at the end.
That's helpful.
Pam has a verdict for us.
Yes. Okay. This is fun. Okay. So I skimmed the whole chapter. You're going to love it. Classical education is above all systematic, in direct contrast to scattered, unorganized nature of so much secondary education. And then we talk about rigorous systematic study has 2 purposes. Rigorous study develops virtue in the student, the ability to act in accordance to what one knows to be right. Virtuous men or women can force themselves to do what they know is right, even when it runs against their inclinations. Classical education continually asks a student to work against her baser tendencies, laziness, or the desire to watch another half hour of TV, in order to reach a goal, mastery of a subject.
It fell apart for me at the end.
I know all that virtue we're building up so we can just master history.
I wish you had just ended in order to reach a goal, period.
Yeah.
Then we could have just mad-libbed it and filled in our own goal. Well, that's actually more human than I expected it to be, though.
But it's one paragraph in like a 600-page book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is true. I think she seems to be mostly concerned with methods and resources, right?
Academics.
But I mean, like how to put together what you would do in the day to day. And I want to be careful. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. We need those kinds of resources too. My concern is if we define the classically educated man as a well-trained mind, are we missing out on this fully human component? Because he's not just a mind. I mean, I was even thinking about Charlotte Mason's when she gets into what she means by children are born persons in school education, she goes over and over again that the first thing you have to know, what she calls the letting out of waters, basically like the dual nature of children. They are body and soul in unity. that they are both. That's what she rests everything else on. And we all quickly rush over that when we're reading her to something that sounds more interesting to us. If we think our education is just about the mind, it's even a denial of the body.
But definitely the soul.
Which is why PG mapped or whatever from the liberal arts tradition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We have all of those.
Starts with piety.
Yep.
And gymnastics.
Yes.
Yep. This is another total tangent that maybe we'll have to take up another time. But this is one of my questions I like to ponder, especially while reading an education book. And that is a secular classical education even possible? And I think no. Part of it comes down to this idea of a human being, body, mind, and soul. And so all three have to be addressed and recognized. If you ignore a facet of our being, then you are not educating a human in the full extent. And a secular classical education would be different from pagan classical education, right?
I was going to ask where the pagans fit into this. Like, was it just perfected after the?
Yeah, I don't think that paganism is an option, a valid option anymore after Christ. But before Christ, those were the great thinkers.
They were the classical educators.
Right. But they were not trying to think of man without any reference to the supernatural and divine. They recognized that the supernatural and the divine and the soul existed. So they were still addressing the whole man. And the modern secular movement is a denial of the supernatural and divine. And that's a denial of a part of reality. And so you can't have education.
Back to bad teaching in the public schools. Brandy, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember, in like the health class, and they're drawing a triangle and they're trying to talk about your mind, your body. And then the third part, because they could not have a part for soul, they put emotions.
Oh, weird.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I remember. And sometimes they would call it like your maybe self-esteem or things like that, but it was mind, body. And then they couldn't have a secular word for soul. So those are the best they could come up with.
Oh, they should have read more Freud. They could have come up with something.
I mean, and this is my memory from when I was a very long time ago. Right.
Wow.
So this is, but I remember reading that and just thinking like, and I mean, I grew up in a house that really we did not go to church or anything like that. So, but I knew that wasn't quite right. Like that's not so, and then every once in a while it would change like with the curriculum, like, but those were the things. And that third side always gave them trouble.
But interesting that it had to be a 3.
Isn't it just?
I'm looking through some of our Hugh of St. Victor quotes because they're so good.
Yeah.
This is our entire task, Hugh says. The restoration of our nature and the removal of our deficiency. I love that so much. No matter who you are, no matter how well endowed you are, and I don't just mean your bra size, I mean like sorry, I couldn't resist after it came out. Let's just say you're just a born genius, everything comes easy or whatever. No matter how amazing your child is, none of us are fulfilling what we were created to be, what we could have been before the fall. And all of us have deficiencies, things that are a problem. And so I actually think it's very hopeful to have an education that tries to address that. You're talking about that troublesome soul that nobody wants to talk about or whatever. To some extent, our education like sweeps our problems under the rug and is like, we're going to deal with the things that we know how to deal with so we can learn math. I mean, now we're getting to where we can't even do that. But, for the last 30, 40 years, they could teach us math, phonics, that kind of thing. I think we all know that there is more than that to ourselves. And we all suspect that we don't always behave the way that we ought to. And that maybe there's a better way. I don't know. I think it's so hopeful to have an education that admits not just that there's something wrong with me, that by itself isn't actually helpful. But that there are things that could be done, that my teacher might be able to help me. My education might be able to help me. God actually uses means, and maybe those means are for me. That is just super encouraging to me. And that means those means are for my children, regardless of how many deficiencies they have when they're born. There are things that we can do to help them. Mm-hmm. And they won't reach the ideal. We all know that. None of us will. But I'm just saying, like, I just know, I find it very encouraging.
One of the connections I made while I was thinking about this topic was to the way that C.S. Lewis describes heaven and people's response to heaven. And it comes out most clearly in The Great Divorce. Although,
just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, I think is the idea, you can see it in a few places, maybe after reading The Great Divorce. But in The Great Divorce, people are on a bus. So it's a little bit of a problematic schema.
You think?
There's a lot of problems with The Great Divorce. But in The Great Divorce, C.S. Lewis is trying to explain how it might be possible that the unsaved will not even like heaven. They arrive at heaven, the regenerate and the unregenerate arrive at heaven, and everything within and without of the unregenerate people there hates it. And one of the ways that he expresses it is that they fade. They are shown to be less solid, more thin, but not in pant size, more translucent. Yeah. Whereas the regenerate, the people who are ready for heaven, are able to exist in heaven. Okay, so it's been a long time since I've read the book and I'm butchering this, but the idea of every part of your earthly existence either preparing you or it would be the opposite of
like de-preparing you.
Yeah.
I mean, really like undoing things.
Yeah. For heaven, for the experience of heaven is a good thought,
right? Just bearing you down, just chiseling it away. Yeah.
So you're more unfit for heaven the more you go down the path of evil.
Yeah.
Well, and in the Old Testament, oftentimes the prophets talk about how God visited them and put leanness into their souls.
Huh.
And he would send that upon them when he was disciplining them and things like that. I don't know exactly where it is. I think in Daniel there's a part, but he sent leanness to their souls. And there's a pastor I listen to, and he talks about, building up children and giving them fat souls. And so, education is how we build up kids and things, but not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lean and fat is another great way to express, I think, that same thing that C.S. Lewis is getting at in that metaphor, where you're either more substantive as a person in your inner self, or you're becoming less so. And heaven can only be experienced by those who've been trained for it, prepared for it. Again, it's not something you're going to graduate and achieve. It's a trajectory that you have to continue to until you get there. And then there's that whole C.S. Lewis metaphor of higher up and further in. Even when you get there, there will still be more developing and not perfecting. That would be a heresy if he meant that, but
purgatory.
Well, there you go. But then you're not in heaven yet, right?
No, but you're being perfected for it.
You have to be prepared for heaven. Your soul might not be ready for heaven. And I think that that's a part of this idea of restoring our nature and removing our deficiency, stopping the entropy that's going to happen if you don't counteract it, and pursuing sanctification. And education is a piece of that sanctification.
Okay, I want to push back a little bit.
Good.
Okay, so I'm trying to remember who it was, but I think it was in Bede's Ecclesiastical History. It talks about this guy whose name I don't remember because I don't narrate well enough, apparently. But he converts to Christianity like very suddenly. And then even before he can be baptized, he is martyred.
Well, you have thief on the cross.
Right. Okay. Yes. But this guy was like burned to death. And so I'm pretty sure this is Bede. Anyway, it basically says like, and so he received a baptism by fire instead of water. It's how he puts it.
Nice.
So my thought is like, so you mean to tell me that guy can't enjoy heaven? Like, that's what it sounds like. Maybe you're saying.
Oh, he was martyred.
Yeah.
Right. I know, but I'm just saying he didn't have any of this other preparation. So, I mean, this is just me pushing back because I think that's not what you're saying.
Right. You don't want anyone to go away with that idea. That is not. And
but like all those unclassically educated people out there are like cut off from God because of their education. Like, you know what I mean? Saying, no. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, maybe I should also say, by the time you get through the Great Divorce, then you realize that C.S. Lewis was basically a universalist. So that's
true.
Also not what we're saying.
Well, it is kind of, I actually feel like I just learned a lot about people who are alive now. Because I was like, yes, it's true. We all can be that person that has a problem with heaven's welcome mat, right? Because they're basically on heaven's welcome mat. Like, they're not even fully in it. And some of these ladies are already like finding fault with everything. It's like, oh, yeah, I've been that person on occasion that nobody can do anything right. Nobody can please me. And
yeah. Well, maybe this comes back to that statement of in Augustine's rule, where you need to worry more about yourself than others.
Yeah.
But whatever life we are given, we are called to grow in sanctification. And some people are given more time and some people are given less time, but we're all in the end going to be sanctified. And it's going to happen at different degrees and different speeds and over the course of different lengths of lifetime, but it is a common goal. So just because some people don't get as much time to prepare doesn't mean they aren't going to be ready, but it means, what time are you given? What time do your children have right now? And what are you using it for? Are you using it to become ready for heaven when you get there? Or are you using it for yourself and self-indulgence, which would be going the opposite direction? It would be de-preparing you.
Because fit into a word today.
Yeah.
I did have another quote.
Good.
And by the way, when Hugh says wisdom, well, in the English, I mean,
yes,
he didn't write it in English, but the translator always capitalizes it because Hugh very much ties wisdom to knowing Christ. Our modern minds tend to separate out theology / scripture from everything else and call that the pursuit of Christ. And like everything else is the pursuit of, I don't even know what we're calling it, but we tend to separate that. But Hugh, because he's a medievalist, like he doesn't separate those things. And so whether you're studying astronomy or whether you're studying geometry or whether you're studying literature or whether you're studying your Bible, you're still pursuing wisdom, and wisdom ultimately is Christ. So I feel like I need to say that before I read the quote, just so it's evident that he is talking about all sorts of types of instruction, but he is deeply Christian in a way that is foreign to most of us. And so he is not separating that out from his faith ever. He says, we are restored through instruction so that we may recognize our nature and learn not to seek outside ourselves what we can find within. The highest curative in life, therefore, is the pursuit of wisdom. He who finds it is happy, and he who possesses it, blessed.
Yeah.
And I love that quote so much.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even realize how deeply Christian the medievals were and how superficial our understanding of these things are. And I think that's why we struggle with a lot of this stuff, just because we are moderns trying not to be modern, but it's unavoidable because this is the air that we've been breathing our whole lives. And this is the culture we live in. This is our paideia. unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so it's a fight for us. And that's why these things that people say, like, they're a struggle for us. But I think it's because there's just so much that's been lost. We've lost our definition of wisdom. We've lost our definition of study. We've lost our definition of man.
Yeah. I mean, T.S. Eliot's my favorite quote of his, but where is all the knowledge we have lost in the information?
Hopefully we didn't botch it too bad, but.
Well, it all comes back to and points us to the fact that the only fully human, fully perfect man is Christ.
Yes. Amen.
And so everything should be about becoming more Christ-like. And so if you're uncomfortable using the phrase more human, then try more Christ-like. And I think you're really getting at the exact same point that's being made by the classical educators. And that can be uncomfortable because we do live in the modern secular world that wants to separate education from theology, but that's not a classical distinction at all. Right? And the supernatural and divine is as much reality as the trees and the sky. And all of it is made by God. And we were made by God for a purpose, to know him and to become more Christ-like.
Well, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, ladies.
Yeah, this was fun.
This was really fun.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening and being a part of the sisterhood of the podcast. Make sure you're following us in your favorite podcast player so that you don't miss future episodes. All of the books and things mentioned in today's episode are linked in our show notes. Just go to scholésisters.com/SS103 to check it out. Don't forget to go grab a copy of our 5x5 reading journal and enhance your intellectual life and build habits of thinking today, because there is no time like the present. Just go to scholésisters.com/journal and get a journal of your own. In our next episode, I'm bringing on lawyer Brett Stroud as a special guest. I asked him to help me do an intervention with Abby, who has decided she wants to ignore politics entirely and bury her head in the sand. Our ensuing discussion about what classical education has to do with politics is one you won't want to miss. Until then, we want to remind you once again that homeschooling is a marathon you needn't run alone, so open up your eyes and look around you. Find your sisters.
We should wrap it up and hope we don't get a lot of hate mail.
Brandy wants it all.
You didn't finish the sentence. Sent to Abby.
I didn't say anything mean.
Maybe I should start giving out Haley's email address. Like, send it to staff. Poor Haley.
There you go.
Let's end there.
I think we should just stop right there.
Yeah. Boom.
Seriously.
Mic drop.